Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another art show Twitch stream. So, yeah, this week we're doing something a little bit different, and we've got three people in the stream this week, so should be pretty cool. So obviously we've got Tim, our resident guest, and also this week we've got Ned Rogers, who's one of our instructors here at CW Studios. And yeah, we just thought it would be cool after kind of like doing the stream, a fortnight or 3 weeks ago, where Tim and I were just kind of drawing and asking questions. We thought it'd be really cool to bring in someone else as well and just have three people doing stuff, so you can see three drawings for the price of one. So yeah, welcome Tim and Ned.
Are you still drawing that castle?
Well, yeah, I thought I've got that.
Are you still going to draw the castle, Simon?
Yeah. I was like, why not just do that?
Going to redeem yourself with the detail.
Yeah. Yeah. Just do more of it.
Cool. Sounds good.
So what do you think of doing, Tim?
I'm going to stress out and try and draw. I don't know. I'm probably going to try to do something stupid again and do some complicated thing. We'll see. And
how about you, Ned? What do you think of doing?
I'm not going to stress out, although I probably will anyway. But I'm just going to draw some sort of robot.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose. It's never on purpose. Who would stress out on purpose?
That's cool. So yeah, really, we're just gonna be drawing, and yeah, we're just gonna be drawing. And if you guys have any questions or anything, just let us know. Oops.
I'm gonna try and draw without Procreate for the first time in a long time.
Oh yeah, you've been using that?
Yeah, pretty much. Anything technical.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I think last time.
It's just so good. I think anyway. I mean,
you're a fan?
The technical drawing, yeah. What
do you mean? What do you mean by what's better?
Just the drawing guides that it has, I find to be like just the best drawing guides that I've come across in any.
What do you mean?
Program. So like ellipse guide.
Because I have it. Right. Yeah.
The actual mark making and all that stuff is like, it's good. It's fine, as most programs are, but yeah, just the rulers and the guides and that kind of stuff are so quick and so intuitive. There's no fiddling around, and it's a mixture of like a touch screen and the way they implement all that stuff. It's just nice.
Yep.
I've tried a few others, like I tried Sketchbook and what's it called, Clip Studio and all that kind of stuff, and they're all good. Like they've all got their pros and cons, but for technical drawing, which is what I've been doing the most recently, it's the fact that you can just like, you literally, like, I don't know if this comes across on screen in a sense, but like if I draw some crappy straight line like this, and then I just hold at the end, it'll automatically just point it, and
yeah,
which is
right.
Same thing in Photoshop with shift clicking and all that kind of stuff, but it's just not quite as quick. And the same with ellipses. You can draw a crappy wobbly ellipse like that, and then you just pause on the end of it, and it'll just the whole thing back into a perfect ellipse, and then you can
because I have it, but I've never tried doing that. I think we were saying before, because I got a new like the latest iPad Pro, because I had an old one, the first one, but yeah, for some reason the screen crapped out and it sort of stopped registering pressure, and I was just like, anyway, I used it as an excuse to get a new one, because I use it every day, but I wasn't using it for drawing. And yeah, I quite like it. I feel like it was sucking for a long time. And then finally I kind of got it with the pencil, because I don't really care about any of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? The technical drawing stuff, but I was just kind of wanted a good drawing sort of thing. Cause I think it was what I was saying to Simon is like, the real thing for me is just, you can draw in the dark.
Yeah.
You can draw when the lighting is not perfect, which seems like a really, I guess, like a bourgeois comment to make.
I think it's just
I find that-
Tim's drawing while he's trying to put the kids to bed.
Yeah. No, but I found this thing where I would just get I'd get into this real vibe of wanting to draw traditionally on with pencil and paper when it was summer.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of be like, this is why don't I do this all the time? Like, I feel like every year I kind of have this cycle. And I sort of realized it was because, when it's nighttime, or it's sort of winter and you can't go outside and it's super light, because I don't have a proper studio. That's always your artist studio is the north facing sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because the light's good, and it's just not as fun to draw. Like, I never was one of those people who could draw with a lamp. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But yeah, and I found like you can just draw at night, and if you don't have a studio, if you're somewhere else or in the lounge room or whatever, it's so much easier to draw when the light isn't good on a screen. Yeah. And anyway, so I got one. It's good.
Yeah, no, they're nice. I thought Procreate was kind of like whatever right up until they introduced those rulers. It was just like the simplest, cheapest thing you could get on the iPad to draw with, and so I did, and that was fine. And I was like, this is not Photoshop, and it's nuts for painting. And I think I know a lot of people like it, but it was and then they updated the rulers, and I was like, oh, okay, cool.
It's funny how there's a few of those killer features that you kind of
and
once you get used to one of those things, you kind of can't go back. Yeah,
and it's one of those things where it's a specific use case, but like the stuff I'm working on is just like drawing vehicles, and so you need to have that. You need to have that support for being able to draw the kinds of things that vehicles have on them, and like curves and ellipses and all that stuff, which of course you can sit there and stress out and make up circles in Photoshop and copy and paste them. All that stuff.
It's not great.
But it's just a pain to have to do it all the time, and so they won me over with that feature. But then as soon as I need to draw anything else, I'm just like, okay, or if I need to paint something, it's like, okay, I'll go back to Photoshop and do it that way. But
so we've got a question in the stream which is specifically about the castle thing that I'm drawing, but I think you guys can also kind of answer some of this too. The question is, hey guys, how do you approach limiting detail as you move away from camera when you're dealing with detailed subjects like the castle scene? And one of the things that I was going to say that I think is really interesting, and see if you guys agree with, is that when I am doing this traditionally on like paper and pen, it's a really different experience than drawing it on the computer. And it's like on the paper, you only have like a limited amount of like resolution. Like you can only zoom in so far. You can only pull the piece of paper up to your eyeballs as close as it will go, right? But on the computer, you can just kind of like almost unlimited zoom in, and you tend to do details that you don't have. And I'm assuming for like Tim and for you, Ned, as well, this is stuff you guys have to deal with. Like if you're sketching a bit, Tim, and that, like how do you deal with that?
You go, Ned.
I'll go.
Otherwise, I'll just talk all the time.
Yeah. I think it's like it's the same. It doesn't matter what the subject matter is. I don't think it's really, you have to. Sketching specifically, you have to, I think, like really. As you go through the image, you have to kind of start to think about where you want detail or where you need detail. And then I guess in terms of like mark making, when you're drawing, if you're using something like pen and ink, if this robot that I'm doing here, like you're gonna, a bunch of this happening later on, is being suggestive with the detail, which means you have to kind of know what needs to be there, but you also have to know how to represent it in a way that is not all of the detail all of the time, because if you do that, you just end up with something that looks like one of those magic eye puzzles, and is super hard to read, and there's just way too much going on all of the time. So like with the mechanical stuff that I'm doing here, you're going to see that kind of suggestion happening in areas that, there's maybe a lot of moving parts, but it's not the focal point of the actual design or the image. And yeah, it's a matter of, I guess, like, the way you deal with it and the way you get better at it is just practice, but it's like observation of what details are important and how you can suggest them when they're not meant to be front and center. And I think a lot of that also comes from just looking at other artists' work, because you obviously can't go outside and look at a tree in the distance and go, oh, cool, that's what that detail needs to look like when I draw it. You have to you have to experiment, and then also like look at other artists and go, okay, well, I see how they're varying their line width or varying their value or varying their hatching or whatever it might be. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. And then, yeah, just kind of try and limit it as much as possible. And in terms of the digital problem of like being able to zoom in infinitely, I try not to. It's really hard, but
it is really hard.
I find like if you're on a Cintiq or you're on an iPad or something like that, where you have you have the pen on the screen or on the paper, I find it a bit easier because you can kind of get there's the level of zoom that I have here on my painting or my drawing at the moment is about the size of an A4 piece of paper. So it's kind of just like sitting in front of me and I can see it without having to squint and all that kind of stuff. I think if you're sitting away from the screen as well and you have a tablet in front of you, maybe it's a little bit more tempting to zoom in because your face is further away from the screen. But you do have to kind of just try not to.
Yep. It's one of the biggest challenges for digital art, I think. Like I often say, like I think when people start worrying about using undos and all this kind of stuff, it's like, look, digital art is really junk in so many ways, and that is one of the real ways. And I think it's it's not just that, but like what you're looking at is not really what you're drawing so much of the time, because when you're drawing something like on an actual bit of paper, like you actually know how big that thing is. You actually know how big someone's actually going to see something. And so it's very easy for your brain to kind of, I think, make those decisions on the fly. And I think what's happening is when you zoom in or you're doing the digital thing is your brain's just getting confused, right? It's very hard to use your intuition. Initially, it's something you have to train. And it's very tricky to just kind of be like, well, obviously I should just be doing this, right? It's like, no, that's actually really hard because it's not that there's nothing natural about it. You know what I mean? If you zoom in or you zoom out, your brain just automatically adjusts like, oh, this is sort of what I need to focus on. That's why people often advocate zooming out or reducing resolution and those sorts of things. It's because it's really difficult. And I think
so. What does like reducing resolution do, Tim?
I guess the hacks you can use, right, are there's a couple of things you can do. I can certainly go over that. But yeah, the reducing resolution basically just means you can't add detail, right? It's just physically impossible because you run out of pixels. The other thing you can do is zoom out. Do you know what I mean? So, like I've got this thing I'm sort of drawing and I can sort of zoom it out like I am now. And that way it's tricky, for me to add detail because, you physically sort of can't. But yeah, I think you have to train yourself to be aware of the detail, right? Because I think one of the main things you're doing when you are doing painting is you're managing that, right? Like this is one of the major pillars of art: distribution of detail, hierarchy of detail, right? If you're doing a painting or you're doing what Simon's doing, which is a drawing, which I can't see, but I remember exactly what it looked like. That's half of your job. For that image, right? For like a something without a character in it, I think it takes on a much more abstract sort of image, right? And the abstraction rules apply. And a lot of it is just simply you have to get the distribution of detail and the hierarchy of detail right. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to tell any story, right? So that's actually
Yep.
a huge amount of what you do is it's not just like, oh, how do you do that? It's like, well, yeah, how do you do that? Well, you focus on it. You know what I mean? Like you're constantly thinking about that. So the tricks that I would use are, I always have a separate version of what I'm working on. So right now I'm working on, I actually have this is a small Cintiq. So it's a 16-inch Cintiq that I'm working on now. That's the screen you see. And normally what I do is, I think I have a shortcut for it, which I think is Control F2, and that just creates the new window, right? Come on. So it gives you like a second window. So these are the same image.
So how do you do that the like long way around?
Window, arrange, new window for the file, right? So window, arrange, and you go down, and right at the bottom of that arrange submenu,
awesome.
There's an option for new window for whatever PSD you're working in. And so that it's actually, I mean, some people use the preview tool, right? So you use the window. Where is it? Navigator, isn't it? That's what the thing calls. Yeah, you can tell how often I use that. Yep. So the problem with the navigator is typically like, and I think it gets better and better, right? But it's still a bit pixelated. It's not giving me a great image of that. To me, and
it doesn't update sort of 1-to-1 either.
Yeah, so it's not it's not as good. So I could drag that navigator up there, but the easiest thing to do is just take this one, right? And again, these are just the same file, right? So again, something I do here updates there, right? So it's the same file. It's just you obviously can't paint on both at the ssame time.
I know when I first saw someone do this, I'm like, oh my God, what is this magic?
Yeah, so what I've got now is I will sort of put that, and right now, because I don't have anything on there. So what I'll do is I'm sort of working on a Cintiq on an arm, and that's kind of like quite close to me, and sort of back up there on another arm that's a little bit sort of higher. I now have, right, so sort of like up here.
Someone's just asking how you do that again, the second window thing.
It's window, arrange, right? And down the bottom of the arrange submenu, there's a thing that says new window for, in my case, it's the name of the PSD is 100 shots, 36. So yours would obviously see something different, whatever PSD. And then you can open up 5 of them. You get, 100, I assume at some point.
It maxes out, yeah.
Photoshop will say no, but yeah, you can do multiple ones of those. So now I've got that file, right, open up on a monitor. And actually what I normally do if I'm not having to, if I'm not sort of, if I want to be focused on it, I'm going to make that full screen, right? So that's now full screen on my monitor up there, right? And so that allows me, so if I have this screen here, right, that I'm working on that you guys can see, I would say the image that I'm working on at this scale is probably like, a little bit longer than my hand is long. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, I can sort of cover it up with my hand. It's probably like, I don't know how big it is, centimeter wise. I have a ruler here. So it's kind of like 20 centimeters by sort of 10, something like that. Right? So that's quite a small, like I'm actually drawing on something that's quite small. So it's very easy for me to control the detail on a low level. When I get zoomed up, I'm going to have and that allows me again to control large shapes. The problem is, when I start to zoom up, right, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be trying to draw a face here or something like that. And it's going to be very tricky for me to see the rest of the image, but I'm going to have it on a screen, full screened, so I can see the whole image at all times. And I think it's one of the things I feel like people don't appreciate about digital art is that's actually one of the major things you juggle is trying to figure out like how are people going to view this image. Like you might be working on an icon for a mobile game or something, right? And that thing's going to be like tiny. Now it may be high res these days because mobile phones are quite high res, but small. It's going to be very small. So managing those sort of things are super important. And that's always been the case with art, right? You look at, the Sistine Chapel, when they're painting that, right, it's some guys probably on some giant bit of scaffolding or some trapeze thing, sitting up there, like, one with their face 1 foot away from from some, I don't know what. Does anyone know what they painted the Sistine Chapel with?
It's a bunch of
like that wet plaster stuff or something. There's some of those crazy things, right? But you're sitting up there in the middle of the sky painting this thing, like your nose is touching the wet plaster as you're painting this stuff at it, but you're trying to conceive of what that's going to be looking like from the ground, right? And art has always been about that, right? Like, how do you view it? How do I view it? And so the tricks that people would use were, they say constantly step back, right? Step back from your image. Obviously you can't do that now. So you sort of zoom out, zoom in. One of the best things I think you can do, the simplest hack, right? And getting a second screen, I'd say is less, you don't have to get a good one, right? Like, this is the second screen I have is a fairly low end, sort of 27-inch. I think it's sort of like the 1440p sort of resolution. So it's quite decent, but it's not like a pro level monitor or anything. It doesn't matter. It's just for me to see it. But the simplest thing, and the thing I found the best, is just get your drawing, right? And it doesn't matter what resolution, doesn't matter what anything, and just sort of, I think Control 0 or full screen. So just Control 0 full screen, and just never change that. Don't zoom in. No zooms, right? And that's the best way to kind of avoid that, right? If you're struggling with that, just don't zoom in ever. Yeah, but there's a million ways where you can manage it, right? Because sometimes you need to zoom in.
Well, it's kind of funny as you're saying this, because I know you can't see the screen just because we've got a different setup, guys, this week. But
yeah, I can't see.
But I'm literally zooming in and out like crazy as you're talking about it. So I'm just doing complete opposite. But
yeah,
but I think it's just.
No, you go.
Well, I think it's just understanding that you can do that, right? It's like paper can't. No zoom, paper, right?
Yep.
Computer can zoom. So it's just going to be slightly different. So it's just sort of, we were talking about that last time, Tim, where it's like sometimes just doing stuff on the computer is different to doing it with traditional techniques. And you just have to be like, this is how it is. It's just like that. And then just get used to it. That's all. Kind of like what Ned was saying with the Procreate stuff, like just once you get used to it, then you're kind of like, oh man, I love this, and you sort of, just get into it and do it. So
there's also I think in terms of what I'm drawing at the moment here, like this is kind of like how I like to draw this stuff in, kind of replicating a kind of a Copic or a marker kind of workflow where you kind of ghost things in fairly lightly and but fairly thick. Like it's pretty, like you can see mine and Tim's images look pretty similar in terms of like the approach at the moment.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I like to stay light, and I like to basically try and use a brush that gives me a pretty heavy handed, like I don't have, if I'm really careful with it, I can kind of control the opacity, but it's pretty much all or nothing. But it just doesn't quite like fill to 100% every stroke. And that's essentially limiting myself in terms of value. So it's kind of like when you limit yourself from zooming in, you're limiting resolution. And when you use like a single value, you're limiting yourself in terms of that, which means that I'm not tempted to go in and try and describe super dark shadows, for instance, because I can't do it because I don't. Yep. And so I'm gonna stick in this kind of work mode until I'm happy with where the image is, and like in composition and form and all that kind of stuff. And then once I'm happy with that, I can start actually going and looking for details that I need. And then I have to start to, I guess, consciously use my brain in a different way. So instead of limiting myself to just thinking about big shapes and, overall design, I'm now kind of expanding that scope of what I'm looking for with my eyes to, medium-sized shapes and some details. But it's really, it's about discipline. Like, it's about limitations of what you're trying to do at any given point. And, like the real, probably the biggest thing that you find people do in terms of like detail and too much of it is that they not only do too much detail, they go looking for it way too early. Because you can always add more detail to a piece. It's not always going to make it better, but you can do it. And there's probably going to be something there that you can observe and translate into the image. But whether or not it suits the image is a different argument. But it's like, you have to then still get the process of when and how you look for that detail correct as well, for it to make your drawing experience successful, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, again, like to me, the salient point is like, that's not a small thing. That's actually, actually like the majority of the battle. Once you can kind of draw a thing, do you know what I mean? And you're not, and that's why I think often people struggle to create bigger scenes and images and things like that and get the finishes, because if you're just thinking like, oh dear God, how do I get the perspective right in this? You're not thinking, where's my focus? Where's my 1, 2, 3 read? Where's the detail go? Does this look better with this thing here or that thing there? You're kind of just in fight or flight panic mode of like, oh no, this doesn't look like anything. Once you can get things looking like things, it's much more about how do you get it to look good, right? How do you tell the story of what's going on? And the concept of detail and like avoiding adding detail is not just like, oh, like how do you do that little trick? It's like, that's actually what most people are thinking about most of the time. And that's what separates, the really good painters from people who are kind of, again, just people, like anyone can kind of like do a little bit of, I think like someone like, again, like John Park is a good example of that. I think often what makes his stuff so good when he's doing that painting is it's exactly that. It's the hierarchy of detail, and that's what makes people be able to do that crazy stuff where they just do one brush stroke and it kind of does like 10 things, because they're thinking about that so much. And that they're not thinking like, oh, how do I get the light right? They're just thinking brushstrokes and hierarchy of detail, and that's what allows people to get that kind of crazy looseness, right? And like that's what you focus on. So the first step is like get to the point where you can draw well enough that you can start to think about those things.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like, with perspective and stuff, which is something that I think a lot of people do struggle with when they're learning. It's like, you have to, if you want to get better at perspective, you have to limit yourself, I think, to images where all you're trying to do is solve that perspective issue. And if you want to take it further later, great. But when you're sitting, like, that's why you would draw a primitive shape like a cube or a cylinder, where it's like, you don't have to worry about detail. You only have to worry about, is it a cube and is the perspective good? And then once you've done that, really, I think the best thing you can do is like stop drawing and go and do another cube. Because if you then sit, okay, now I've done that, I'm going to detail it and shade it and look for all this crazy stuff. You're kind of forgetting that the reason that you sat down in the first place was to get better at the perspective, or
not about the cube,
or whatever,
Yep.
Yeah, and there's we're actually getting quite a few questions about some of that stuff, and I think where this question started, Sparhawk said, my problem is focused around getting enough detail into the non-focal areas. However, it sounds like reviewing how other artists have approached it should help. Great answers, thanks guys. So cool. Yeah, I think that like potentially, that original question was not about like they're having trouble getting detail in. It's about, having trouble controlling where the detail is on the digital, because sometimes it can just get a bit of like, I am doing detail everywhere, which is, I don't know. There's a lot of Last of Us art lately, which is just that. The details are everywhere.
Yeah.
Have you seen that stuff, Ned? Like all the new stuff. It's like, it's actually kind of like, I'm starting to like not find that almost as appealing as it's like pushed so far now. It's so realistic. It's so pixel perfect that it's almost losing that artistic quality to it.
Yeah, it's like a bit of a sensory overload thing. I think it's, when I can go outside and I can look at the city and I can see a bunch of stuff. But how interested I am in looking at that stuff is kind of going to be a bit of dumb luck as to, what happens in front of me and what happens in the background. And if someone has a car crash right in front of me, hopefully not, but if something dramatic happens in front of my nose, then I'm going to look at it. But if that happens like 2 blocks over and I don't see it, then it might as well have not happened, right? And I think like the thing with some of that art where the detail gets so insane is like the trick there, I think, is to put the interesting stuff in the right spot. And I think sometimes people, the forest for the trees kind of adage, right? They kind of forget to a point, maybe sometimes, that the whole idea is to put something interesting in front of the viewer as opposed to just putting detail. Detail is not interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said, you can walk out into a city street and look at a completely, my syntax gone weird. Look at a bunch of detail that is not interesting inherently. The role of the artist or the role of the designer is to put not only things in front of the viewer, but things that are interesting in front of the viewer. And that's not necessarily going to be just making things more detailed. It's actually about, the idea or the concept. And then you mix that in with the execution, which is what gives it, its look, its style, the aesthetic.
So that's really interesting, Ned. So you're kind of saying like with that, there's a case for you can have loads of detail everywhere, but if you're still controlling where the viewer's kind of looking, where the eyes going, all that kind of stuff, even amidst all of that detail.
Yeah, you can. I think like, the fact that we have these things called films, which are photographic inherently, like is testament to that fact, but also you don't have to do that. And I guess like, a game like The Last of Us or any other like hyper realistic modern game where we've got to this point where I'm not going to say it's easy to get that level of fidelity. There's still a huge amount of technical skill obviously happening there.
No, but it's achievable. It's
achievable. Yeah. So it's like, you have to be really careful with that now that you put that flag in the ground and go, okay, we can do this now. It's like, all right, cool. Should you like all the time? Like, is it a way to get the story across?
Yeah. Well, I think it's that's a can of worms, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like that's tricky because I feel like probably I'm very much certainly like I look at that stuff and I kind of look at it and it's very tricky for me because, and I've talked to Simon about this in past shows, is like, or maybe not even shows, but just like trying to figure out how much 3D to use and like how, you know what I mean? Like what should you do, right? Because it's obvious that is immensely useful from a production standpoint, right? Like people are doing that stuff, like the Last of Us concept art and the sort of photoreal stuff where it is, and they're balancing, but they're doing it in a more filmic way, right? It's less about painterly, sort of hierarchy of detail, and I think they're delving a lot more into the filmic tradition.
Yeah.
And it that really has changed stuff, right? And I feel like when I see tutorials of people doing that, like they're referencing a lot more film, like their sort of inspiration sheets and stuff are films. And that's probably because that game in particular is probably spearheading the idea of film and game kind of becoming one thing. You know what I mean? Like that's,
yep.
I feel like that's kind of where they're at with that. I think it's you can look at that as well, just from a photography standpoint, right? Like this has nothing to do with painting. It's just like making pictures from an abstract standpoint. You have to think about focal point and where the detail is and how you're going to control that. And people have been doing that with photography for ages. You can get a great camera and you can take a bad shot, right? What's the number one thing, Ned? You're a little bit into photography. What's the number one thing that makes photos look better?
Composition.
No. Apart from that, just say like you're taking a camera and you're just shoving it in someone's face and you press click, right? So you say you're just like, I'm taking right? Like you just shove a like, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, what's the fundamental difference that makes the most difference?
Well, okay, I feel like there's a very specific answer you want.
I do. Yeah.
I'm now self-conscious about not saying.
No. Well, I would say to me, it's depth of field, right? If you look at like the mirrorless camera sort of revolution and what all of the major phones trick you into doing is to give that the depth of field and the bokeh and that look, right? Which is where, you know, and that's what the mirrorless full frame camera thing sort of allows you to do. It allows you to have those really fast lenses that'll let a lot of light in, and that kind of gives you that depth of field. And depth of field just looks good.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? It's like if you turn that portrait thing on your latest iPhone or
straight
whatever,
away you're
like,
a pro.
Straight away, it's like, oh, that looks better. What is that doing? One thing, it is organizing the hierarchy of detail in your image automatically, right? What you're focused on has the most detail. Everything else has significantly less detail, and automatically, like say, like 99% of people are just going to look at that and be like, that looks better than if you take the same camera but put a slower lens on it, or you just, you know, change the f-stop, right? And then because then everything's in focus, right? And everything's in focus, then nothing's in focus, and the image is not as good. You get a camera or trickery or whatever you do, if you can suddenly get depth of field so the background's blurred, it just looks better. People are just like, that looks nice. And it's like you're still just being like the click, but you can be like the click, and it'll look like garbage because there's no hierarchy of detail. But if you just blur the background, you notice that like most things look good, because there's a story there. It's like, look at this thing, not this other stuff.
Yeah.
So and everyone, like, if you want to be good at art, just blur the background, okay?
Literally.
That's your takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of what makes the professional is knowing how to metaphorically blur the background, right? Because the background could be the foreground, the background could be the middle ground. The background is simply what is in a hierarchy less important. And so, yeah, you see those sort of tricks, right? And you see, if you look at YouTube, right? Like YouTube was just like, oh yeah, on that bandwagon, right? Mirrorless camera, that's what I have. Like, do you know what I mean? When I'm doing the my sort of class stuff, it's just a mirrorless camera with a fast lens, and it's less. One of my lenses broke, and so it's less good than it used to be, and that's purely because of the background. It just doesn't blur the background as much. And everyone was just like, this is a really cheap, easy solution to making a composition good, because previously you had all this crap in people's houses and stuff like that. Like, just go look at it. Look at YouTubers and look at what they're doing. Half the time, and especially like look at some of those people who review cameras, right? And like, here's the camera that's good, you know what I mean? And here's the one that's not. And one of the biggest differences is just you don't see all the crap in their lounge room, you know, when the background's blurred, and it looks better. Because hierarchy of detail. You listen to what someone's saying when you're literally focused on them. So I think people have been doing that for a long time, right? And that's one of the primary things. But yeah, I think it's probably, we'd all find that doing that kind of art, which I think, Simon, you're probably the person who does the most like that, where it is highly sort of detailed, photo based.
All of the photos.
Yeah, it is becoming a lot more about being like a director than an artist, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of overlap there, right? But probably maybe less and less, right?
And I think all this stuff, like, so for you guys, I know that we've got people that are like pros listening. We've got people that are students. We got people that you know, haven't drawn much before at all, like all different levels. And what it really goes back to is that, like, it really stems back to what we were talking about before, where it's like, it's just you knowing like how to control stuff. So one of my things I always sort of say to students is like, well, if you can do it on the computer, you should be able to do it on pencil and paper, right? Like, yes, you might not be able to have the control or the dexterity in the tool that you're using. But if you practice that enough, then you should be able to do what you're doing on any device, anything that you want. It's just about then learning the tools. So, for example, even the stuff with the, real high fidelity Last of Us concept art where it's full on, it's still about like just basic composition and shapes, right? And controlling all that stuff. So all of these things, they always stem back to,
I think once you start getting into the filmic stuff, besides like depth of field, so much of it is about controlling where you look via lighting.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's detailed, but the contrast is significantly changed. Whereas when you're a painter, the contrast, the way you often get low you would just sort of paint it more vaguely, right? Is a much easier way of doing that than kind of painting it all nice and then just lowering the contrast in it. Whereas when you're doing it in 3D, it's like that's kind of free, right? Like you could make everything contrast if you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So it removes the need for you to optimize your speed by using suggestive brushstrokes.
Yeah, no, that's it. I think like that's the key thing. I think to look at that kind of Last of Us stuff is I think like lighting composition. I think is like because that's the way I look at it is like that's your first step. It's your that's literally deciding what is inside the frame, what is not in what's behind me, what's to the left, what's to the right, what am I putting in this image, and then lighting is one of those things that, like you said, is that the technology now has gotten to a point where the lighting can be free in the sense that you can whack a light into a 3D scene and it will do what it's meant to do. Like it will simulate real life as well as it can. And so
you don't get any points for that anymore.
No, you don't. Like that's
being able to paint that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Whereas you used to get major points for that.
And you put cast shadows exactly where they need to be, like that. That's one of those things you look at someone's drawing and go, holy shit, that person is like a crazy good draftsperson. Whereas nowadays it's like, okay, cool. I put a light in this scene and my shadows are correct. Hooray. But like it's one of those things where, if you are learning that stuff, you have to first figure out what are the things you can control, when you're drawing or when you're modeling or whatever, painting. And then you then have to figure out what are the ways in which I can control these things that will benefit the image, and so that's where you have to be careful with like 3D and stuff, where it's like, yes, you can get lighting for free, but do you know what to do with it now that you've got it? And that's something that, again, now that we're kind of, the detail is an assumed thing where you go, okay, cool, we can load a bunch of stuff up from Megascans and get photo real assets into the scene. It's like, cool, that stuff is free, but you are not done yet. Like you have to now put that stuff in the right spot, that's composition. And then you have to put light on that stuff in the right way that makes the image that you're trying to create or the idea that you're trying to get across work. And like detail for detail's sake is not something.
Well, I think we're on the tail end of that. Like I think 5 years ago it was, adding, and I think a lot of concept artists would sort of put more detail into their images than should go in there, because I think people expect it, you know what I mean? And the painterliness is kind of not appreciated as much all the time, especially unless you're very good at it. I feel like often if you're in a commercial environment, kind of putting more shininess on things kind of is a good way to cover yourself. And I think a lot of people were in a situation where like being able to be an artist who can just throw a bunch of detail in an image, and like with the photo bashy thing, I think like that's a good example of that, where it's like, the more high frequency detail I put in here, the more real it looks, the less some executive producer is going to be like, it doesn't look real. And I feel like the industry is still a bit like that, but I think that's going to disappear. I think like unless you can really make images that not just are good, but fit the mood and fit the thematic story, do you know what I mean, in a very high-end way, it's not going to matter, right? Because it's just everyone's going to be able to create that sort of photoreal look.
Yeah, that's it. You get to a point where feedback you're getting on an image is, you can make it look more real. It's like you get to a point where it's like, should I just go outside and take a picture of the street with my phone and send that in? And then they'll, it looks super real. And then they'll be like, but nothing's happening in the image. And you're like, now we've got to the crux of the problem, right? Is like, it's not that it needs to be more real. It needs to be better. Like it needs to be more.
Yeah. But I do think that, in the past, like, I think people have been able to say they have been able to get away with just making it look kind of realish, not even real, just like, it doesn't look like a drawing,
Right.
And I mean, like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago in the concept design sort of industry, I felt like that, even though, I was working in comics at the time, I felt like that was the case, right? That you could just kind of be creating stuff and have it look real. And that was enough to kind of, sell the image, right? And I think, like, now you can just see that that's almost worthless, right? A lot of it is about taste and mood and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is, I always talk about this stuff as being important when you're sort of younger and coming up, because I'm assuming most people who are kind of listening to this are kind of in that gray area, right? Where they're maybe like just starting out being professional, or they're sort of just starting their journey. And I think it's really important to look at that and see what, like, the industry and what the world tends to value over time. You know what I mean? Because if you spend a lot of time getting good at, like, sort of photo bashing, like, I don't know how you feel about that, Simon, but to me, it kind of feels like that's kind of going to disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, that's those skills. Like, if you don't keep up with that on that track, right, you're in trouble.
I think that Blender is already ruining that. Yeah, it's like
it's over. Like, that ship is sailed.
It is kind of. That's where it's like I
'cause
used to really like the mix of, photo with paint. Like, you could see it in an image, and people that could do it really well could get a really nice balance of that stuff. But I actually think that, like, some of that stuff is over. It's like, that doesn't look good enough anymore. So to a director, it's like, yeah, I can still see the paint strokes. It's not finished yet. And you're just are you guys serious?
And you start to be able to see the photos. Like, when you compare it to, again, what people are doing when they're really mixing, like, I think a lot of it is just people getting really good at photo bashing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think before it was like, oh, you're a concept artist, so you can be a bit average at blending photos. Whereas I think now, like, people have, like, just these photo libraries of stuff on alpha with alphas, and all this stuff. And so they can really blend stuff in and make it look super polished. And they know how to, create, like, it's like, if you can't get something really polished, or you can't find something, they know how to, make it in 3D and sort of do it. But to me, that's kind of interesting, because it's kind of hilarious, where it's like almost, people are like, oh, I miss the days of photo bashing when
no,
you know what I mean?
It's literally like that a little bit. I think
when men were men, and like, it's kind of that that sort of nostalgia that you can see is kind of just misplaced. It's a very brutal industry. I guess that's what I'd say to people. It's really about understanding that you're working in a production environment, and your job is to kind of help that production, right? And anyway, I mean, I feel like it's like, to me, because I never did much photo bashing, I have no horse in that race, but I can imagine a lot of people are, maybe there's some people who are cut about it, or maybe they're just enjoying Blender and mega scans and stuff like that. But yeah,
I don't know. I think you just adapt. What do you think, Ned?
You have to adapt. Yeah, it's a matter of adapting, I think, and like, it's, for me, it's always just been like, ultimately, and this is speaking very much as from a concept artist point of view. It's nothing to do with illustration or anything like that, but like, your job is to visualize an idea.
Yep.
Whatever tool you use to do that is irrelevant to the client. They don't care. They just want the image to look like how they saw it, or if they're, if you're in a position where they're like allowing you to completely dictate the style of something, like, they just want it to look like you're saying it's meant to look. And so it has, to a point now, we are getting to a point where the tools are high fidelity enough to where the role of a concept artist is to show me how this looks on screen. Like, show me exactly how this looks in the game.
Not how it might look, or kind of how it could look. Show me exactly.
Frame from the video game, or a still frame from the movie. And whereas, go back 10, 15 years, it might have just been like, hey, sketch up this weird idea and we'll give it to someone else and they'll put it into the product.
Yep.
And so you would just give them a pencil sketch and they're like, cool, that's a great idea. Whereas now I think like maybe the phrase that comes out of, people's mouths more is like, oh, that's an awesome frame from the movie. And you're like, it's not from the movie, it's a piece of concept art. And like all of that, all the rougher stuff maybe still, is of course still happening in the background, but like the assumed deliverable now with a lot of that filmic stuff is just like make it look like the thing, because you can. Whereas, 15 years ago, you couldn't expect one person to sit down in front of a computer and make a concept painting that looked like a frame from a film in a week. They could do it in months, but they would have to know several disciplines. They would have to know a bunch of different software, whereas now it's like anyone can just sit down and learn how to use Blender and Octane and Megascans, and you can do it all like a one-man band. And so the job description has changed. Like that's the real.
Yep.
But like, to bring it all full circle, like how do you get good at that? And it's like, well, I guess you have to still learn the fundamental stuff, because now the images that you're being tasked with creating contain all of these different variables. They contain all these cinematic design variables. They contain, cool ideas, good lighting knowledge, good perspective knowledge, like, all this stuff. And so it's harder, but it's easier in a sense, because you have to know stuff, but also your ability to learn more stuff these days is like so much better than it used to be with YouTube and all that kind of stuff. Like, like a lot of my work day when I'm doing design work is like, oh, I want to do this, or I need to do this, so I'm going to go sit and watch a YouTube video that teaches me how to do this thing. And if you not so much if you're just drawing something, but if you're doing 3D layout or something like that, it's like, oh, I don't know how to use this. There's this new tool out that I know that if I figure out how to use it, I can do.
This problem will go away.
Yeah,
this will be easy.
Yeah, right. And and I think like you sit there and you're like, okay, well, the investment of my time is a 20-minute YouTube video plus an hour of screwing around in a program that I've never opened before. But when I get this right, even if I only have to do it once in my life, it would have taken me, 10 hours to do this with photos and paint. So if I spend 2 hours learning and 2 hours working, I've got 10 hours of work in 4 hours. And it's like, okay, cool. That makes sense. And so it's I don't know. I'm rambling, but it's like,
no, we get it. That makes sense, Ned. Yep.
But it's like, I think that's the most important skill is like, can you adapt at any point in time? It's like, and I think like that is in a way is like kind of being creative. It's like if you were a chef and someone was like, oh, I want this thing off the menu, but I can't eat this, this, and this. Then your job as, as a professional is like, can I still make this taste good? Here's what I have in the pantry. Can I still make this taste good? And like, or do I need to go out and buy something else to make this work?
Yep.
But they want their food in 20 minutes. And it's like, so you have to then figure out what it is you are capable of doing with the skill set that you have, or the skill set that you can teach yourself quickly. There's a bunch of like, I haven't done any of this type of work in a little while because I've just been on other types of projects, but like I was, doing my fair share of photo bashing and 3D stuff. And it gets to a point where you kind of just have to go, is there something I can learn to do this? Yes. Oh, cool. I found this weird little program that some Russian dude made, and it allows me to, do this weird thing with a 3D, like with a render or whatever. I'm going to use this once and I'm done. And it's like, I'm never going to use that again, but it got the job done. So it was good.
Yep.
And
yeah, well, I think we were talking about this last time, weren't we, Simon? I was saying that I was watching some of those tutorials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was just like, oh, so now you just use 10 programs. I forget who it is. Was it? Yeah, again, I still forget who was doing the tutorial, but yeah, they had like 4 GeForce like 2080 RTX cards or something like that, and it was sort of just rendering, like just ray tracing things, fun. and using like 5 programs, and that seems like that's kind of the near-term future of doing a lot of that work, which I think is interesting, because I feel like it does, to me, it really starts to bifurcate and sort of separate a lot of those roles in the industry, quote unquote, that I feel like were a little bit more blurry before. And I don't think it's necessary. I think it's always been a little bit like that, right? But I think now that's very clear. Like, if you want to draw, don't go into VFX.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, do not work in movies. If you want to draw, like, work in 2D animation. Not like, I'm gonna sort of do some in, some 3D animation, but you still draw because it's more important. I feel like the more and more, like, if your output is not going to be significantly stylized or very much drawing based, like it's a 2D animation or something, like, don't get into that industry. If you don't like the idea of learning 20 programs, don't start doing VFX concept art.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like 10 years ago, you would often sort of say like, it's kind of all the same and everyone needs, the same things. Whereas I feel like it might start to become different, right? Where the needs for those skill sets are actually going to be different, right? And it's not, there's not going to be the same interchangeability that there was.
It's an interesting thing though, because like, this is something I've thought about quite a bit, is that I agree with that 100%. Like, if you like drawing, don't go into VFX, because no one's going to ask you to pick up a pen and draw something. They're going to ask you to, open up Houdini and put some nodes together and do that kind of stuff. But you still, like, if you want to work in concept art in that regard, like if you're making images, like you still have to have a good understanding of all the fundamentals of good filmic as a image making.
But do you still need to know how to draw? That's the question.
That's the thing. Is like,
because I feel like people are still going to say, and I feel like even people who are maybe still, who are using lots of RTX cards and doing it that way, I think they might still say that. And I know we kind of, I think like, there was that classic video that Shadi Safadi sort of put out, like, concept art is dead. You know what I mean? And I feel like I'm like, once a lot of this Blender stuff started happening, I'm like, I sort of see what he was saying now about that. And I think my response back then was a little bit more like, nah, but blah, blah, blah. Whereas now I'm like, right, so I've just got to get out of concept art. It's like, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like very interesting to me.
Do you think though that the process of learning how to draw is
so here's the philosophical discussion.
Never plans on drawing professionally.
Is it worth it?
Like,
where do you come down?
I do, because I think it's a slow process that doesn't give you things for free.
Trains you discipline.
Trains discipline and trains you to figure out the workings of the image. That's where I come down on it. I don't know, like, but then it's also, I feel often very hypocritical in saying that, because I know that on a day-to-day when I'm doing realistic work, I'm not drawing anything.
I think what it does a lot is it actually teaches you a lot more than you think, and it actually gets you to places faster. I think if you start out with 3D, like in Blender or something, and you just want to become a concept artist and you do all the JAMA courses and the blah, blah, all this stuff, I actually think that you will get better at doing concept art if you started out drawing and painting. Right? And then you learn the tool later. I mean, we see it from students all the time, so you guys know we're all on the same page.
Well, I'm saying that ironically, I'm leaning against that. Do you know what I mean? Right now, I'm like, and again, this is because I don't have a horse in that race, right? Like, I'm on a different sort of career path than that, I guess.
Well, I just think everyone that's really good at that stuff is also kick-ass at drawing and painting. You know what I mean? So
I would say that's true, right? That is true now. But are we going to see?
Maybe.
Because this is it. Like, this is, you never know when you're the dinosaur. Right? That's the thing. And I'm like, once I see that stuff, I'm just like, right, I get it. You know what I mean? This is a different thing now. And is it just going to be people sitting there studying, the more realistic aesthetics, and maybe they're just going to sit maybe, how do you, I guess the question is how do you train that, right? Because all the people who are good at that now, who are sitting there with crazy setups, using DAZ 3D and, a million programs and stuff, I think all of them who are good at that are great artists from a painting perspective, right? They're very, very competent, professional level artists. So I'm like, is there anyone who is that person now? I don't know, but I would say, yeah, I guess I would worry. I wouldn't put money on what you're saying, Ned, but I do find that a little bit troubling. So I think that's the most interesting thing that I sort of think about. I've been thinking about that a lot recently.
Yeah, because I know that, like I said, I'm often, if I'm doing a realistic work, I'm sitting down and I'm learning a tool in an afternoon to do a very specific thing, and I'm often wondering, as someone who also has to teach this stuff, is my ability to sit down and learn a tool in an afternoon, pragmatically and in the way that I need to use it, is that a result of me having gone through a relatively traditional artistic education and learning how to draw, or is that just something that I happen to be okay at? Like, it's a personality trait where it's like, okay, I need to do this, and it's like, I don't know, because I'm in a position I can't put the shoe on the other foot.
Exactly.
Yeah. Someone else's point of view. It's really
And I mean, I would say that the thing that makes me hesitant about this, even though, and again, for people listening, you can just go to my site, timmcburney.com, if you haven't, and see the kind of work that I do. And there's not a lot of 3D stuff there, and not a lot of photobashy stuff there. And that's not to say I haven't used that, do you know what I mean? And I'm not sort of ignorant of it, but I would say that it's really tricky from a career perspective to figure out, do you zig or zag with this stuff, because it's just, you just don't know. But I do remember, when I was studying graphic design, it was just at that point where computers were, it was like, oh yeah, everyone needs to learn how to use a computer, right? But just literally where you have to draw it all out with a tech pen,
Yeah.
And I was just like, F you guys, this is BS. I'm out of here. You guys are dinosaurs. You are yeah, you're just future oil that I'm going to put in my car, right? You are just, irrelevant genetic matter. This is over. Do you know what I mean?
That got harsh really quick, Tim.
Well, I would say, because I always worry, because they were, I think Tim, I really felt
Tim's becoming dinosaur. You're getting a complex, aren't you, Tim?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm well, I remember the frustration I had back then, because I could tell, because I just started using computers and I was just very fluent with computers. I'd been using them very early on. So to me, it was just why are you guys doing this? It's obvious that this is all dumb. Do you know what I mean? It was just clear as day. I don't have to use that. And I'm I'm fond of that, right? And this is where it's tricky. I'm still fond of that, because it taught me a lot about how it was done, and I appreciate how easy things are now. But I'm
So here's the thing is well, maybe we were talking about.
Did they need to do that, or could they just have done all computer?
But maybe it's just more about so perhaps 5 years in the future, we'll just be designing a lot more in 3D from scratch. You know what I mean? If you think about the way sort of VR is going and things like that. So there's a lot of people using that, and they're if you just pick up VR and give it a go, you're going to come up with a pile of poop, right? But you have to you still have to learn how to design to do that. But it's just, I think just the tools for learning how to design will be different. You know, it's not like design doesn't change. Composition doesn't change.
So I guess the question is what are the core skills, right? But also, like, a lot of people, I mean, if you're sort of working on, you know, like what's the latest, they had a new, like, was it Daxter or whatever that.
Yeah, Daxter.
Yeah, Daxter or Dexter or
Daxter.
What is it? Daxter. Yeah, like, you see the latest version of that, and I'm like, wow, that looks super cool. That's like really cartoony. You know, like, and I feel like that's one of those situations where you might be sort of thinking, you know, it's a lot easier to kind of design some of those shapes and things, and it has like a cartoony atmosphere. So maybe that should sort of there would still be a lot of design done in 2D where you're kind of trying to replicate that feel. But I don't know how they do that. Like, it might just be that people just think in 3D, you know, and they just design that stuff in 3D, and it's better and more efficient from a production standpoint just not to even draw it. You know,
and those people are probably potentially the people that we're talking about who are like, okay, I never had a traditional drawing background, I just learned the new tool, and I'm now just doing this straight in 3D. Whereas, like, I know my brain, because, you know, like, working on I'm just trying to juggle NDAs around in my head. Yeah, like, okay, I think I'm allowed to talk about this anyway. You may never hear from me again. The Lego show that I'm working on, right? The Monkey Kids stuff is, like, I still draw 90% of that, but for every single image that I've done on that show, there is a 3D base, but it's very, very basic because of the fact that it's really just like, okay, what's my perspective, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's what I'm using, which is like the old school way of using 3D and concept art, which is just like, I can't be bothered drawing perspective for this.
It's quicker not to do it. Like, you're wasting time.
Yeah, and
by trying to draw it.
I know that I cannot, the types of shapes that I have to use, which are obviously very stylized, I cannot place them I cannot come up with them in 3D without having something that I've drawn first. So, like, the process becomes like thumbnail to just solidify the idea, 3D to solidify the perspective, and then, you know, back into Procreate, and I just draw everything. And it's like, that is, and until the tools, and, you know, as someone who has used a lot of 3D, like, I've done my fair share of ZBrush, and I can model pretty proficiently, and, you know, I've mucked around Medium and all that kind of stuff. Like, I still like testing out all these new tools. I can't see a tool yet. I'm looking forward to one, but I can't see a tool yet that actually solves the drawing problem for me, because it's like grease pencil kind of comes close, but then for what I have to deliver on a show like that, which is just like, you know, 3/4 front and back of a vehicle, there's no point in me using 3D for its ability to light an entire scene perfectly, because there is no scene. It's just a vehicle. And so it's a really interesting thing. And until the tools get better, I would be pretty happy putting money on being able to do that more effectively than someone who doesn't know how to draw. So it's a weird one. Again, that's why I think, like, the skill you just really need to have, and the skill you need to be prepared to learn, is that ability to adapt and just figure it out and get it done.
Well, it certainly seems like, and again, I always sort of see that as being a big personality difference, right? And I feel like that is, like, there's a lot of other art forms where, you know, you can draw, right? Like that's for a 3D show, right?
Yes.
You know, but there are, you know, 2D shows, and there are sort of things where you don't do that. But yeah, I feel like that idea of, like, having to adapt, I think that is a personality trait, right? Like, it'd be interesting to see how many people who are like, oh, cool, yeah, you just got to adapt all the time, man. It's just got to stay up with it. Yeah, like when you can no longer photo bash, or when it's all VR, you know what I mean? Like, people, like, how many of those people are still going to be like, yeah, just adapt?
Oh, I think that is a really big part of, you know, like a 19, 20-year-old coming through now. I think you have to have that ability to want to, like Ned was saying before, where he's like, oh, I can just find a program and that will save me 14 hours on this particular thing. It's like, you have to be someone that has that mentality in sort of, like, if you're going to be doing, you know, production style art, where there's deadlines attached and there's things that need to be done quickly, because if you're not, you become invaluable to the, to a team or whatever very quickly, right? So I think that's something that, certainly at CDW Studios, like we're trying to teach people to be comfortable with doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of a skill set almost, being comfortable with like, oh, I need to solve this problem. I need to sort of almost use this brain power that's just not drawing whatever I want or whatever the case may be to find a solution to how to do something. And like that's a bit of a learned skill, I think, as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I would say from my point of view, I think it is something you can learn, but I think also it is a personality type where people enjoy that change and they enjoy the process of the problem solving.
Oh yeah, no,
right?
for sure.
And I think what I'd say is like, if you don't, you need to realize that's how
that's what's going on.
Industries are going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at, right? Is I'm sort of like, like if I start chasing too much 3D stuff, like right now I feel like, I can just learn this and do a bit of stuff. But I just have this feeling there's going to be a bunch of these kids who are like, right now, they're like 12, and I'm going to be a dinosaur trying to be like, I'm still got to change, adapt, overcome. You know what I mean? And they're just going to be like,
I'm sure Sid Mead thinks that too.
Exactly. Right. Like how much of a futurist was he, and still like, why wasn't he just using digital all the time? It's still,
I know, but the thing is, like, that's a good example, right? Where it's like, well, but his design sense is just more kick-ass than other people, right? So even at 90, he was still relevant, like, which is kind of crazy, like the fact that he could still do
but
stuff.
How many? This is what I always say is like, Sid Mead, but I mean, Sid Mead is like a god, right?
Yeah.
How many people were like Sid Mead-esque that you'd never hear about, right? Like, how many people are just right now they're dinosaurs because
well, there was lots of those guys. I mean, a lot of the Star Wars guys, there's still plenty of them around, doing stuff. There's like, Doug Channing, like you can see in his work, he's kind of like still tries to hold on to that traditional stuff, and then you've got Ian McKay, the same, right? Like he just draws. That's all he does.
Yes.
So
it feels like, but people tend to, if they're still relevant, they sort of move a little bit out of production, right? They're going into sort of management, art direction. Do you know what I mean? Like, how many people are there who are like 70 who are still plugging away? You know what I mean? Like just drawing all day.
Yeah.
That's I'd be interested to hear about that, and like what that's kind of like, because I mean I'm sure there are.
It's one of those things where like those like Neville Page and all those guys, like to me. And like it's Sid Mead and stuff like that. I look at that stuff and look at Sid Mead's work and you go, okay, like he's not was never current with the tool of the day, right? Like he's not out there rendering stuff out in Octane, but the ideas coming out of his head were still ahead of everyone else, or they were still the ideas were still relevant. And I think to a point, if you get comfortable or if you get adept. That's a terrible word to use in relation to Sid Mead. Adept is like, that's the biggest insult you'd ever say, right? You become a master of the tool that you're using. As long as you can fit that from a career point of view, as long as you can fit that into what the industry expects, then, happy days. You will work and you will work successfully. And of course, a lot of that is leveraging his reputation and his abilities.
I think so, yeah. Because he couldn't have been fast enough.
No, and that's I think like I would be completely talking out my ass here, but like the number, like the kind of money that he got paid to work on stuff later in his life, huge numbers, right? And like a lot of that had to just be so like, we got Sid Mead, like we had Sid Mead, and it's like, okay, that's a badge of honor, and some people will care, and most probably most movie going public are probably going to be like, who? Like they're not going to know, and that's fine. But like if that's, and if you're in charge of the budget of a multi-million-dollar film and you want to throw 40 grand at someone to do 2 paintings, like all power to you, right? But and all power to anyone who's making that kind of money. So it's like it's all good, but it's I think like if you get that good, or if you are that good, then the tool doesn't matter. But
yeah,
it's all about getting that good first.
0.0001%.
It's all about getting that good, and like
yeah. So I mean, to me, that's there's no answer to this because we don't know, but I do see that changing, and I think it's not just interesting. That's why I'd say to people like, I often feel like I sound like a dinosaur in class because I like to talk about how I did go to TAFE and how I had to do paste up and finished art, and I sort of tell them because it's like that story is your story, right? You may be sitting here like looking at me and saying like, yeah, but that's completely irrelevant. And I'm like, yeah, but the stuff we're all doing now will be the same somehow in the future. You know what I mean? And that's sort of super relevant to this industry in general. And I think the thing for me that starts to clarify for me is like, if we're looking at sort of students and stuff, like if you're not that kind of person, if you're not, and we all I've seen students who are like this where they really seem to like learning different programs. You know what I mean? They like the change, the adaptation, they like the problem solving. And it's almost like that problem solving is more fun than the finished result or anything, like that's kind of the goal is to and I think that's a real that has been traditionally a very VFX sort of attitude, right? It's all about problem solving. It's like, we're going to solve this, it's like we're going to solve this with some glue and sticky tape, in the old VFX days, it's all just about like, how can I make this thing look decent? By making some monster and, throwing glue all over it.
Do you think those things are kind of converging somewhat because games are getting so realistic? Like, do you think that that's an interesting crossover there?
Yeah, well, I think it's like that's why it's happening because the needs are sort of there, right? Like it's more about it's less about, and I think the thing is because it's very difficult. I feel like with a production like that to get a lot of personality that's based on an artistic drawing. You know what I mean? Like that's just not going to make it to the viewer. It's just not the relevant information, but I like, for me, I'm not one of those people. Like I do not like having to learn a new program. I just can't be bothered. And I think like, that's not to say I can't, like you're saying, Ned, like you can, but should you?
Yeah.
Because it's like right now it's like, it's easy to learn a bit of 3D. And if you could draw, you're kind of good. But I'm like, yeah, technology changes, right? Like that's the thing I do know is that technology changes and whatever we're sort of saying is like, is going to be important now. Like it kind of just isn't, right? Like for instance, it's like all of that graphic design stuff, essentially all of it was completely irrelevant because the whole entire industry in the vast majority of the Western world has just become offshored. Like it's like it's like it used to be, it's really hard to make a job. Like this was the reality we got into is like from an industry perspective is like, don't worry about being an artist. You'll never make it. All the money's in graphic design. Like, I don't know whether you guys remember that. And that was because there were graphic design agencies. And this is in Australia. But now I'm like, I don't think do you guys know I know that big companies still pay big money for graphic design, but I feel like that would be a really challenging industry these days because it's so easy to get someone to make a logo for $5. You know what I mean? On one of those websites, like 99 designs or whatever those things are where you get like 100 people to make your design. And I'm just like, that's like the worst thing ever.
Yeah, I feel like agencies now are like, I don't know, but the impression I get is that, that's like their 75% market research department. And then there's like still a few guys who wear turtlenecks and drink black coffee who like, hunch over cutting boards with acetate all day making stuff.
So a lot of it is sort of I guess like marketing.
Pay us $100,000 and we'll tell you why changing this to a non-serif font will
we'll tell you which logo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But no one. But yeah, but we could pay this guy. We have him lying around. He wears a turtleneck and looks cool. Or we could just put it up to Fiverr or 99 Designs and get someone in India to make it for.
Yeah, there are no studios in Bangalore that could do his job for 5 cents on the dollar.
Yeah. And so that's like, that was the thing, is it was like, oh, you never make any money in illustration ever. It's so hard, and now it's just all design, but there's heaps of jobs in design. And I'm like, well, that's not the case anymore. So it's just, the stuff changes really, really quickly. And it's very hard to know, like, back then it was like, oh, is it a computer or is it traditional, or, oh no, and it's like, oh, in fact, that entire conversation was a complete waste of time because that industry disappeared.
Yeah.
So it's like the degree to which you can get out competed or whatever is like, fairly significant. So you do have to think about those things, I think, when you're, just starting out, even if it sounds a little bit like people just sort of talking about the old times. It's like that's what I'm trying to talk about when I talk about that stuff, is like, here's what people were coming to blows about. There's like digital or not digital, or like, are you an idiot for doing this or that? And it's like, now you're all out of work.
Yeah, no, it's like remember people used to say that digital art was not a real thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And now it's photo bashing is not a real thing. And like people were literally frothing at the mouth arguing about, is can you use photos and still be an art? Yeah. And now it's like that ship sailed significantly, like, like it's like, that's
it's quick enough to do like a photoreal painting and it wasn't 3D, and then someone's going to come along and go, you can't do that, it's not 3D. Like,
it doesn't look good enough, right? Like, or like, it does, but I think I guess this is the major caveat I would say, is it's like, if you're really good, you can survive all of those things because people are willing to, and often you get so competent using your particular tool, like, Sid me with acrylic or whatever. But if you're just kind of going through the paces, right? And I think that's like that. I would fear there's a lot of people in that situation, kind of, just being like, you just kind of do this and this, and that's kind of how it is. It's all photo bashing now, so I don't need to learn how to draw. Just sort of do this. It's like, I imagine that would be pretty scary. It's kind of just being in that at that production level.
I'm actually
and then all of a sudden,
I'm finding this chat really interesting, but we have had so many questions.
Go for it. I told you, someone stop me talking, or I'll just cut.
It's all good. So we've actually got a really good question that happened, like, an hour ago, but I think it's really cool. Was hey guys, just wondering how you feel about doing personal projects at this stage of your career. Do you struggle weighing up taking jobs versus your passion projects?
Do I struggle making that decision? No. Is it a decision you have to make? Yes. I think like they're still as important as they ever were. I think, because it's that point in the day or the week or the month or whatever that you get to do something without anyone else's boots all over it. You get to exercise that part of your brain that just gets to like happily trot through a meadow and do whatever the hell it wants, which I think is super important. I guess, from a career point of view, it's like I guess you make time for it where you can. You still have to work, so you still have to make money.
What do you do, Ned? Like, give us an example.
Well, I mean, I'm in a position in terms of what I do as a personal project, or
and how you would balance it.
For me personally, I balance it by going home and going, do I have any freelance work that I have to do today after I'm done with my studio commitments?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then I generally will try and draw something in the direction of helping a larger idea that I'm trying to run around and get done over a longer period of time.
Yep.
so that's I guess like that's the structure it takes in my life. Is I like to pick a big thing and then I like to chip away at it over a period of time.
So you have an ongoing personal project that you basically.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I've got like a few, and like depending on how I'm feeling in any given day, I'll sometimes feel like doing this one and sometimes feel like doing that one. What ideas have popped into my head over the course of the day. But it's like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily, it does take the position of still like also filling my portfolio with work that is stuff other than what I have to do for other people, which allows you to like target, in terms of my freelance work, it allows me to target particular clients who I might want to do work for, who I don't necessarily have something sitting in my portfolio that is going to necessarily attract them. But yeah, like it's in terms of like, should I, I have a job, I'm perfectly comfortable doing the work that I'm doing. Is like, do I still need to do personal work? Like, yes, but it does fulfill a different position in my life, in the fact that is, if I just didn't do it, I'd probably go crazy, because I'd probably then start talking about all the weird ideas I have, and then people would think, oh, the psychopath or something. So, it's
do you find as well, Ned, that like it's I know for me it's not really like, well, yeah, I guess myself and Ned are a little bit different because we're kind of working on projects that are pretty fun to work on during the day, right? So like for me it's sort of like, well, sometimes it's just doing a sketch in your sketchbook, or it's just doing it doesn't have to be a whole project or a whole IP or a whole, it can just be just doing something else that you just want to do, like, yeah. So, and I guess for you, Tim, it's a little bit different because you're going to freelancing a lot and stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's a big concern for me. I mean, I don't know where the question is like do we sort of struggle with that sort of issue, or like how do we kind of handle it, or because I mean for me that's something I always sort of think of.
I think that maybe they were asking, like, they did say, do you struggle weighing up taking jobs versus your passion projects? So it might be a case of like they're not feeling super fulfilled with the jobs they're doing and trying to work on stuff on the side. So I guess that's a slightly different topic, I guess.
Yeah, well, maybe. I would say there's so many things I could say about that. I don't know where to start because I've been thinking.
So they've gone back and said, I ask more because I know Tim is comic based and has written his own stuff. So so I think, and just saying whether that comes into play, whether you'd like to work on more of your own stuff or.
Yeah. I do. If I could, I just draw and write my own comics. The problem is I haven't figured out how to make a living doing that will sort of pay the bills. And that's not to say that I'm like, oh no, it can't be done. It's just that there's what I talk about from a business perspective is like, and I don't know whether this is a student sort of asking this or just someone who doesn't know, but my basic thing for the whole, if you're looking at career stuff, the goal is very simple. It's that I think you need to draw the stuff you want, and I think you need to make enough money, right? And what enough money is changes, if that makes sense, depending on your life.
Everyone. Yep.
It's your life situation, and it depends. It changes week to week, month to month, right? Because it's like, oh, I've got tons of money in my bank account, so I won't do that job. You know what I mean? It's more important that I do the art that I want. So it's a constant sort of changing thing. And I'd say that I would try and avoid, and I certainly do avoid thinking of it from a global perspective, right? As in like, this is personal work and this is not personal work. I'd say I'm always trying to move towards doing stuff that fits my sensibilities more and more, while making sure that I earn enough money, right? And yeah, so to me, like I have lots and lots of plans and things that I'm sort of planning to do. that are sort of, I have sort of things that I'm writing and things that I'm doing and all of that sort of stuff that's kind of on the boil. But if I don't get enough work, or if I get enough work and it's kind of what I want, it's basically job to job, like day to day. That's how I kind of handle it. And I think strategically it's a matter for me of like moving more and more towards a situation where I can try and spend a significant portion of my time doing those personal projects, right, and making it kind of work some way. But yeah, I've really only been doing freelance stuff that isn't sort of comic based for 5 years, I think. Before that, I was sort of full-time comics, really. So yeah, that's a constant sort of thing. But sometimes I'll turn down jobs because my schedule's too full. If I've got enough money in the bank, I'll just be like, yep, cool. Sometimes, something that comes along is like, oh, it's maybe not exactly what I want to do, but it pays really well, right? So I know, like, if I do that, then I'll have heaps of free time. Sometimes something might come along that it's not a personal project, but seems like it would be very fun for me to work on, right? The money might not be quite as good. It's sort of, it's sort of tricky to tell, or, you know what I mean? Yeah. So a lot of it is just like day to day trying to manage those sort of issues. But yeah, I would say I don't, because I've trained myself not to think that way. Does that make sense? Because I think it would be very easy to get upset if you did sort of think that way.
If you were just like, oh shit, I can't do my personal projects all day, every day, you mean?
Yeah, right. Getting sort of down about it. But I do find that, like I was working with Defiant Development on their game. And if you look at the work that I've sort of posted from that, it's almost exactly just what I would do for a personal project, right? It was a fantasy-based game. And they were like, whatever you do, like, they were kind of after my stuff, right? And one of the things I noticed career-wise is like the more I go and the more I'm sort of saying, like Ned was saying, the more I fill my folio with stuff that looks production-ish, right? And it also fits my personality and my sensibility, the more I tend to get more of that work. And so I sort of see that there is a lot of possibility to sort of basically do stuff that would be very, very similar to my personal sort of stuff, but get paid by other people to do it. And that I could also then just try and sort of work on my personal project and sort of do freelance work as more of a production thing. And I think that's the real balance, right? Is like, if I kind of just say, this freelance stuff is like, whatever, you know what I mean? And I don't really try and work on that and build the folio and build relationships with people. I think that can be, I might be able to work on a personal project, but I won't enjoy the freelance work as much because I haven't put as much effort into it. So it's I think about this stuff all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like how to fine tune that, because that's the point. Like I've gotten to the point where I can do the work. People tend to pay me to do it now. So it's like, what do I do? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I have found a lot of value. And this is the other thing, is that I think I've always found that I've always found that interesting things happen when I work with other people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know whether you guys feel the same when you're working on these projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'll always be like, like doing Pinocchio as a comic, for instance. I'm like, well, that's not me writing it and drawing it, whatever. But like, it forced me to do so many things that were very interesting to me. And I think if you just work on personal projects, and maybe you haven't had enough chance to grow, it's very easy to sort of get very mono sort of culture about it, right? Like get very sort of, you start to repeat yourself, right? So I think there is value to working with other people, essentially, which is how I view freelancing. Because it just forces me to do stuff, and I found that to be very valuable. So there's sort of there's almost a case where I feel like it's worthwhile me working on freelance projects, because even if it is something that I wouldn't do myself, like I always find I come out the end of it getting like, oh, that's interesting. I can draw that now, right? I can do this thing, so it's sort of, that's a case where if I was to do my own personal work, I don't think I would grow as much, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I do find that process interesting. So it's I think that's a real balance, and that's the kind of stuff that, I think a lot about. But the other thing I'd say is I find that if I don't do if I'm working on something that isn't in any way related to what I want to do, and that could just be I'm working on something that's science fiction based, I really get an itch to do some fantasy work. You know what I mean? From I just need to do it. I need to, if the work that I'm doing, maybe it pays well or it's challenging, but it's not really fitting just whatever I want to draw at that time, then I just get super itchy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it is important to be able to have an outlet to do that. And I certainly, the thing I really try and watch is like when my schedule gets so intense that if I did want to do a personal piece on the weekend, like there is no weekend, like I'm working 12 hours a day on the weekend. That's when I feel like that's always a bit dangerous, because I feel like it's very easy to get, I don't know, sort of jaded.
And I think that's a really important point, is that the more that you kind of get experience doing this stuff, for a job, the more that you have in your portfolio, the more that your professional work will match what you're doing in your portfolio. So, sometimes, and I'm sure Ned has this as well, but, there's been times where, like you were saying before, Tim, a client will come up to you and it's like, I remember starting out, you get given, and probably Ned knows this one too. It's like the client will give you like a reference sheet of like, you've got to make it like this. And there's all these other paintings and things. And then like, as you go along, all of a sudden the reference sheets don't happen anymore. They're just like,
exactly.
You're like, what do you want? They're like, we don't care, whatever you want to do. And you're just like, what? The first time it kind of happens to you, like, what? You want me to just do my own stuff? Oh, okay. And then after a while, you start realizing that, oh, actually, they just want you to do what you do. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But it does take a little while to get to that point. So, yeah, for these of you guys.
Additionally to that point too, that's why it is so important to do that personal work. Because when you're starting out,
ironically enough,
they do this, and it's not something that you would normally do, but you need the money, or you want the experience, or whatever, and so you do it, and then that becomes the thing in your portfolio that everyone's going to see because you get the credit or whatever. Like it's a big project, or it's a big enough project to show off and show the world, hey, I did this thing. That then becomes your brand. And so if people keep coming back and going, hey, do that thing that you did last time, and you're like, crap, this is not the thing I actually want to do. If you never make the time to do personal work, that's going to be what people want you to do for the rest of your career. And so you get stuck in this horrendous feedback loop of like doing stuff that you're not into. So like what you said, Simon, like these days, and because, because I'm teaching enough in the sense that like, I don't have to worry about where the next job's coming from, because I'm in a salaried position, so it's like I get paid, which is good, and I get to design stuff at work, and I get to do all that stuff. So with my freelance now, I get to be really selective with it. It's like if I don't want to work on something, I just go, nah, I don't think that I'm going to do a great job on that. You should probably go and get someone else, and I can refer friends or whatever and be like, hey, get this person, they'll do a great job. And so that's a really nice position to be in. And so it means that like I do more often than not now, I can be in that nice spot of having jobs that kind of fulfill what I want to do creatively. They fulfill something, it's like, oh, I might have done this as a personal project if this person had not come and asked me to do it anyway, because it's really close to what I do naturally. Like again, the show I'm working on now, that I know for a fact, because this is something, here's a hot tip for students and people who are starting out. Like when people come to you and say, hey, we want you to do work, ask them where they saw you. Like, where did you find me? And what was it that you found that what made you want to email me and say, hey, can you work for us? Because then you'll get a really good kind of barometer as to like what it is you're doing that's working. And in the case of the Lego show, for instance, like I know for a fact that they just saw my Instagram stuff, which is where I put my personal work. And it's like just a bunch of really dumb vehicles and like ultra colorful stuff. And it's what I really like doing. It's not something that I'd ever had a huge amount of opportunity to do professionally, because I think it's a little bit wacky and it doesn't necessarily sit in a large spot in the industry. Like not a lot of people are necessarily doing that because it wasn't on trend. But then I'm like, oh, cool. Like there was never any discussion as to whether or not I should take that job internally, like with my own brain. Because it's like, well, they basically just want me to do what I'm doing on Instagram, which is basically me just going home and sitting on the couch and drawing dumb crap on my iPad. And it's like, I get to do that job. Oh, I get to do that for money now. So like, that's a big bonus. Which is again, like that's, how do you get to that position? I don't know. I can't give you an answer to that, but you know, that's for me personally, like there is a place there, like you can get there, which I think is very important for people who are getting into the industry or trying to get into the industry to understand, is that yes, when you are younger and you have to take, I've worked on plenty of crappy jobs that I just did purely for money, you know, because that was when I was freelancing full time, like that was my livelihood. So it's like, I got to make money out of this. And you're in a spot on your calendar where you haven't had a bunch of work, and so you're like, oh yeah,
you don't have enough money, so it doesn't matter. I mean, that's how I sort of try and break it down. Is like, if you don't have any money, doesn't matter. Like, don't be picky, right? Like, you know, that's and that's I think often one of the trickiest things is like, yeah, you know, get to the point where you can make those decisions, right? Because that's the first step.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
That's cool.
But I mean, I still feel like, I mean, with all of that stuff I said, I'm still like, no, I just want to do personal things. Like, do you know what I mean? That's what I want to do. And the question for me is like, so I think everyone's different, right? Like a lot of what I'm sort of thinking about and a lot of what I try and sort of talk to students about is just understanding that like everyone is different, right? Like, I don't think I would be happy if I wasn't doing personal work, right? Like, I really know that. Like the excitement of learning the new things and the production is like, that's kind of cool, but I know I'm not that person, right? Who's going to be able to, do you know what I mean? Just do sort of work that's like closer and closer to what I want to do. Like, eventually I need to kind of be like, no, this is exactly what I want to do. You know what I mean? But I also think that doing that, like those personal projects you're talking about, Ned, I think that also is where you can get to another sort of level with your career, where if people know that you can create everything yourself, right? I think it gives you a lot more creative cachet.
Yeah.
And I would say I'm not at that point with my career, because I think a lot of the comic work I did, most people don't really know about it, but I think like, you know, a good example would be trying to, you know, if you're having a sort of meeting, right, and you're talking about story, for instance, like I'm an artist, right? Most people don't know that I've written a book. And I think even if they did, they'd be like, yeah, well, you know, it was just one book and it, you know, it didn't win the Pulitzer Prize or the Hugo Award for, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just a book. But, you know, I think hopefully the more you kind of work on those personal projects, I think the more people are going to trust you.
Yes.
And the more you're going to be able to be a part of that conversation, as opposed to just being like, you're just the person who draws stuff, right? You're just the hands that moves when I say so. And I think that's also valuable, right? Not just like, oh, I'm working in the style I want, but now also you can have more creative fulfillment within a project because people are going to trust you and they might actually want to ask you like, well, what do you think about this thing?
Yeah.
You know, whereas I'd say, you know, in most cases, you know, if you're an artist and you start to talk about story, people are just going to tell you to shut the fuck up, right? Like they're just like, we are really not interested in what you have to say. It's going to be like, yeah, cool. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, we're paying writers to do that. So you just get back in your box, shut up.
Yeah. You know, portfolio of personal work that, shows that you actually have, deliberate control over other aspects of visual storytelling, then you will.
Yep. And you can art direct, you know, it's like no one told you to do that, you know.
Exactly. That's the thing too, is like, I think very importantly for again, for like students and people who are trying to up and coming, is like with your personal work, you know, if like, you know, because I have definitely never written a novel and I'm never going to write a novel, but I have written a couple of what I would call this, I'm sure they're not, but it's what I would call kind of like feature treatments, for things. And that is what my personal work kind of works into. Because in a perfect, someone at some point is going to come and give me a couple $100 million, and this is going to get made into a film. Like, will I ever, chase that actively? Don't know, probably not. But the process of me doing personal work does always shape in the same way, in the sense that I'm not just sitting down and drawing a thing because my hand wants to move. It's I am trying to create, a world or a linear narrative here, or something, which I think then the more you practice that and the better you get at it, the more that is just going to intrinsically show up in your portfolio. People will look at the image and go, oh, well, that's not just like a great study of a thing or a great redesign from someone else's story. It's like, that's an original idea. And not only do I love that image, but I can get a sense that there is a real story structure behind this. And so, if we hire you, like, hey, we are a little bit unsure about, sorry, I just did a bunch of stuff on the wrong layer. We will give you a little bit more creative control, or whatever.
And it's like, I mean, that stuff's that stuff's very tricky, because I feel like it's very bad form to move outside what people are hiring you to do. Do you know what I mean? So the reason I say that's important is because, like, people are like, oh, well, you might be able to do this and do that. I'm like, no. Like, I think it would be very bad form from a freelancer perspective to ever assume like someone's paying you, do you know what I mean? And like, oh, I wrote this book once. It's like, who cares, right? Like, the person they're getting to write this has probably written, 20 screenplays, and they've spent their whole life writing. It's very presumptive to assume, you know what I mean, that anyone's going to care what you say about art direction, right? Because like, you're probably dealing with an art director, and they've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, you know what I mean? So it's a kind of thing where, you really have to prove it, right? By doing it. And I think that's where it's more likely to just kind of maybe naturally happen. People might be interested in it. It's not as if some director's going to care what you think, really. But I think it means that, like, you can have that conversation, right? And you might be of more value. But it's I think if you really want to do the work you want to do, you've kind of got to do your own project. But the other thing I'd say and this is the last thing I'll say, is just that I really found that
this is the last thing you'll say, Tim,
about this.
Oh,
this is the last thing I'll say about that. The more personal work I do, the more I feel like I'm able to actually serve the clients that I'm working with, because I don't ever feel like I'm trying to make their thing into my thing. Like I felt whenever I was working, doing comics, for instance, this is a good example, is I was like an aspiring comic book writer, but, I never really was considering, because I was an artist, I was never really considering writing for other people. So I never did much of that stuff. But I knew so much about it, and I was kind of in that, what's that rule, where you don't know anything about something, but you think you do.
Dunning-Kruger?
Yeah. I was like, I'm aware that I'm in that thing, but it's still annoying. And as soon as I wrote my own book, I was like, this is freaking hard. I'm more than happy for you to just solve all these problems. And I felt like I was just much more, and I don't know whether this is what other people felt collaborating with me, but I felt like I was much better at collaborating with people after I kind of tried to do more things in that. Do you know what I mean? That I sort of understand how hard everyone's job is, and that, like, an art director might not be saying don't do this because they just don't understand or whatever. It's because they've got a whole bunch of stuff they're trying to deal with. They've got battles they're trying to fight, and my best thing to do is to try and help them make their job easier. You know what I mean? Whereas I think when I was younger and I was, I'd be like, no, you need to change the story. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I think the more personal projects I do, the better I get at kind of appreciating how hard all the things are. And then when someone's hiring me to do a particular job, just kind of, it's a lot more fun for me, right? Because I feel like I'm just less sort of of a dick about it. Yeah, so I think like it's super useful. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it helps everything to do personal projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a win-win, right? You can't lose doing it. I don't think so anyway. And that was a major problem. Like that was a major problem for me, like being a dick about stuff. Yeah, I don't think I was, when I was like when I was like 22, 23, I don't think I was good to work with. I think I was a know-it-all. And I was like, no. You just don't understand how to write things. It's like, I've been writing my whole, but I read this book once and said this, so you should.
Even if you have been writing your whole life, there's still some 50-year-old who's also been writing their entire life. So
yes. Yeah. So anyway, I found, but it's not just like, it like stops me. It's not like I'm sitting there saying like, oh, don't be a dick, Tim. It's like, I feel like it genuinely, I was like, oh, cool. No, this is awesome. Someone else is handling this part of it. And I understand that's a very hard job for anyone to do. And I appreciate the effort. I genuinely felt a lot better about it. Like I felt like I enjoyed everything better once I sort of tried to do it myself. And sort of, just learn all the things that go into it.
Yeah. One thing I just want to also come back to, because I know we're kind of running out of time, is like you said a while ago, like your enjoyment of like working with other people and how other interesting things happen when you're working with other people. And that's one, I mean, I agree with most of the things you said, but like, that's one thing that 100% like I would want to reiterate to anyone who is listening is like, even if it's personal work, even if you're collaborating with, another artist on personal work that's not for a client, or just like taking the opportunity to work on jobs where you're working with other people who know their stuff, and can teach you things like I've learned most of the important things, I think, in my career from other people who I've worked with, as opposed to sitting in a dark corner by myself and like banging my head against the wall and then like accidentally coming across some really important thing. It's like you will learn so much more from other people in the industry so quickly because you'll see it in practice, and you'll have to figure it out quickly because you'll probably be burning money someone else's time when you're doing it. But it's like, oh, I see now, and like you'll get that. So it's like, and also for like just your day to day, the kind of like, which is one of the things that I kind of really consider when I'm working on freelance projects, is like, what's my day to day like? Like, is this a company that's just going to send me off into a room and say like, hey, just deliver us stuff every week and we'll say yes or no, and then you can get paid and go away? Or is it a job where I get to have like a Discord call with a creative director and actually, just shoot shit about weird ideas we could do and stuff like that? Like I'm way more into that second one where I get to talk to people and all that kind of stuff. And because I think it is really important in your development as an artist or a designer to bounce ideas around and talk to other people and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really important.
Yep. Well, I find the thing there is just like, because I'm getting paid, I kind of have to do whatever someone's telling me to do.
Oh, for sure.
And that takes a lot of the ego out of it. You know what I mean? And I found that I often find things that I would have sort of, if I know that if it was a personal project, I would have been like, I'm not doing that. And then someone's like, yeah, but you have to. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I sort of go away and try and figure out how to, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make it work. And I'm like, that's interesting.
Like, oh shit, that actually works.
Yeah. And I didn't hate it, but again, that's coming from me. And I'm very much I don't work terribly well with, in big studios and stuff like that. I'm sort of more of a, I'd be quite happy just doing my own thing. Yeah. But I've always found, like, whenever I've worked with anyone, right, like I pretty much learned something super valuable every single time. And often the most valuable things are when it's just me being like, okay, I'm just going to do, so I'll try it, whatever they say, like, let's just give it a shot, and then try and figure out how to make that work. And that's often, it's very hard. I'd say it's very hard for me to grow in that same way if it's just me. Do you know what I mean? It's like, takes longer to learn those lessons.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I didn't appreciate sort of earlier on, I guess. Also, another really cool tip is if your dragon anatomy is a bit shit, just put some spikes everywhere, because that'll solve it.
Yep. Sorry, I just saw a really quick question in the chat, Simon, that I'm gonna because it's like a 2-second thing.
Oh yeah,
and it's
go for it.
Someone Sparhog is asking, can I explain my Copic brush? And I will, just because it's like literally the simplest thing ever.
Cool.
Because this is like, I'm not being facetious, but like it's literally as simple as this. So hard round brush, just default Photoshop, whatever. Take a little bit of the hardness off it, just because 100% looks a bit arse. Squish it like that, right? And then in terms of like your pressure sensitivity stuff, it's just, sorry, the computer's being a bit weird, but it's just transfer, like pen pressure stuff. Just set them both to pen pressure. And then that's literally it. Like that's, shape dynamics, send the angle jitter control to pen to direction, which means that brush is with the movement of your brush. Basically, you don't have to. You can rotate it manually if you want to do that, but that's extra work. And that's literally it. Sometimes if I'm feeling particularly complicated, I'll set the maximum opacity up here down to like 80, so that it means that I can't make a fully opaque stroke. But most of the time I just leave it to 100 and you just don't press as hard. And like that's literally it. You could probably spend more time mucking if you wanted to get some paper texture in there or whatever, but like no big deal. And that's one of the things. I'm actually on like one of those, like an oldish Cintiq. I don't know. This is the 24. It's like an old 24-inch Cintiq, which kind of actually they have like a slightly blurry screen kind of effect, because they've got like a protector over the screen or whatever, which actually makes it look like paper. It obviously doesn't look like anyone else's screen, but for me, I often find that texture stuff is often just a way for me to get over that initial kind of like white canvas fear of just like, oh, I'm putting stuff down and it looks kind of natural. Whereas if I'm at home where I've got like a kind of, like 2K HD 27-inch screens that are like color calibrated and they're way too bright and super clean, it's kind of, I have to put a bit of texture on the brush because the screen is showing me that I'm working in some gross digital hell where everything is perfect, which I don't like. But no, that's literally it. It's just round default brush, don't press too hard. And I guess like the most important thing for that initial first step of the sketch is to just use a light value. Don't use a black value and then like work really light, because eventually you will just end up with black like that. Whereas if you use a light gray, slightly darker, a light gray, if I go over the same line, I can only get to that gray, which is the same as a Copic. If you go over a Copic stroke constantly, you will eventually end up drawing on the table underneath the paper, but it's never going to get darker than what the marker says on the on the side of it. So and like that's people who use Copics, and myself included, tend to be pretty picky. So it's like it looks like you're a C1 person. I was always a W2 person. But like whatever you want to use works. Like it's your pencil case. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So super simple, but I thought we can get 3 questions answered in 2 hours. That's
and yeah, last little one. Jasmine just said, would it be worthwhile doing some group projects briefs to get that kind of experience, or is that more for you once you're in the industry? I've got a specific answer on this, but do you want to answer that, Ned or Tim?
What's your specific?
My specific? Oh, I think it's awesome. And I think it's awesome if you're actually really hard on each other too, because when you're on the job and stuff, like people are just going to be like, no, that's a dumb idea, or like, no, that's shit. And you're going to be like, no. And I think it's good just to like get that out of your system, like being too precious about things.
The only thing I would say to group projects with students specifically is if you're going to do a group project in a break or something like that, make sure that all of the moving parts of that group are tackling the things you need to tackle, right? So because I've seen people do like collaboration stuff before where it's like, oh well, I want to be an artist, but I will be the director for this. And like, don't do that. Make sure that everyone is actually fulfilling the role that they want to be fulfilling in the group. Otherwise you're going to have a completely dysfunctional kind of like quote unquote studio in a sense, right? So it's like, make sure that you actually have, if you're all artists, make sure that the output for that group project is just art. You're
just doing a pitch brief or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, I think picking the project is really important, and like knowing what the outcome is that you want to do at the end. Like, so a lot of times when we're doing, because I've had sort of experience doing this in varying degrees, and like it's like sometimes you don't have to worry about if it's a game or a film or whatever. It can just be like an IP, and you're just making something that's like a vertical slice for that thing. So a lot of times it doesn't matter, like, because the thing is, it's never 999 times out of 1,000, it's never going to go anywhere. So you're getting too caught up in like the minutia details that don't matter. So what matters is you just like having fun, working with other people, and making cool art. So if that's the goal that you want to achieve from it, then that's awesome, right? Yeah, the goal is not this is going to be on Netflix next year, because that's just never going to happen in a million years. So don't worry about that kind of stuff.
Even I think, I think the tricky thing also is like who owns that, right? Like I would say you're much better off doing stuff by yourself, or potentially like with a smaller number of people. Unless this is a situation where you're trying to do an animated thing and you need a whole bunch of people, and you're very sort of clear about what's happening and who owns what. I think normally one of the things is people have creative differences, and people get into little sort of bitchy fights, and do you know what I mean? That's like there's a lot of negative stuff that can happen.
Yeah.
So don't just be like, I could do my own thing, but it's a bit harder. Like it's a lot harder to work with people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm from that group. I know a lot of people love working with other people, but like if you are someone who would prefer working in a smaller team, don't work in a larger team, because otherwise you'll be, again, someone like me who's not good to work with when they're starting out. And I would just have ruined a lot of other people's personal projects by trying to take creative control or whatever. So I think you just have to be really clear about who's doing what, who gets creative control, what you're actually doing, who's pretending to be art director. Is there any art director, or do you just, someone's doing characters, someone's doing environments, or you know what I mean? You're all just working on the same thing, so you're sharing reference. Like, don't just kind of say, oh, we're going to make a thing and we're all going to collaborate. It's like, that probably will end poorly, because you will, and it might be a worthwhile thing, but you might end up finding that you spend, that the thing you learn is how to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a completely worthless skill unless you do it again. And that often, the other thing I'd say that can be tricky about that is, if you are working on like a group project, it can be very tricky to sort of communicate to people who are going to hire you later on, like who did what. And I think it can be a bit off-putting for people who are hiring you if they don't really know what you did on a personal project, but that's your kind of, one of the better things in your sort of folio. I would say personal project, absolutely. I think that's super useful. I think most people who, are doing things in the industry have their own little personal work that they do, and they have thematic things they do to kind of keep that moving, and, ways that they figured out to keep motivated. I think that's a skill that's worthwhile sort of having. If you're going to work on a project that's essentially a parable of a professional project, but no one's getting paid, that's really dangerous, I think, anyway. That's actually one of the hardest friggin' things to do, is to all work together, but not have someone sort of footing the bill who has creative control.
The best thing you can do is just go like, hey, let's maybe sit down and figure out like the base premise for a world, and let's both just do work on this. Let's both do our own images within this world.
No, that's a great way of doing it. Yeah, because it's really hard. Like, that's what I was saying, is like it's hard when you don't have like a boss. So it's really easy when you have like a boss who just goes, no, that sucks. We're not doing that. And everyone goes, oh, okay, all right, we're not doing that anymore. And you might sometimes not agree with that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's a way. It's a way of and a lot of business structures are essentially a way of dealing with conflict, right? So two people disagree in a hierarchy. The best way to solve that is either they fight to the death or the person above them in the hierarchy makes a choice, right? Because, and I think it's especially, there are many other consensus-based ways of making decisions, but if you haven't read, let's say 20 books on that and done a course on how to do that, don't try it, because our entire societal structure is based off hierarchical decision making. You learn that very early in school. Who's the boss? The teacher. Why do you have to learn this stuff? Doesn't matter. It's because if there's no consensus-based decision making. Like, do I need to do this? Do I not? It's like, yes, you do. Why? A higher power said so. So it's a skill not many people are going to have, right? How to actually collaborate and make these decisions and stuff like that. That's why there's a director. Right, that's why there's creative directors. It's not because they're right. It's because if someone doesn't make a friggin' decision, you just sit around arguing about it all day. And if anyone thinks like, oh yeah, but you're sort of talking about, that sounds really immature. It's like, yes, old people who are 50 years old and have been working in the industry for like 20 years can be very immature. Everyone's got their axes to grind and their things they want to do, and someone else is stopping them doing this, and like, you don't understand it. It doesn't matter. Like, if you don't have a good way of making those decisions, then you can just end up basically just burning rubber, right? You're just spinning your wheels doing nothing. So if you're working in a group project, be aware that that is a major hurdle you'll have to overcome. Most of the personal projects I see like that students do, it ends up with like half of them quitting, everyone bitching about it and talking to me about it for like 5 friggin' hours about who said what. And I'm just like, I don't care. You shouldn't have done this in the first place, right? So it's just, and I've seen that a lot. That's all. So I'd say that's not a small task to do that, right? To figure out how to collaborate with other humans. And I think often when you see really great art being made, it's because people have figured out how to solve that problem with a group of people, right? People have hired very carefully. They have good people in all these positions. They've all trained to work together, to make decisions, to make sure everyone's happy. And, there's been drama and tears along the way while they get to that point. And when they get to that point, they can make really cool games, And I think a lot of the time when stuff doesn't go well, it's not necessarily because people just suck, right? You see all these bad games and movies come out, and it's like, how did that happen? It's not because they just sucked. It's often because the team didn't come together, right? The teamwork didn't happen. The vision wasn't communicated properly, or and it could be a million reasons, right? But it's rarely because people just had bad intentions or were just like, hey, let's make an average game. It's often that stuff that didn't happen. There wasn't either a good culture developed, or there wasn't a good person at the helm or something like that. So if you think you're just going to be able to roll in and ace that as a student, think again.
Poor Jazz. She's like, I don't know whether to do one or not now. Anyway,
if you want to do one by yourself, do it, or if you want to do it with like a couple of friends, I think do it, because that's something that I think everyone does, right? Like people working in these big organizations, you often need your personal project to let off steam, right? That's why, you might just be like, I really wanted to do it this way, but your lead is just like, no, we're doing it this other way because 3 other people want to do it that way. And you're like, well, I'm just going to do a personal project where I do it my way, right? Like your imaginary, your way, and you sort of get to be creatively fulfilled. But yeah, like that's what I'd say is like, don't imagine that that's just easy. I guess.
Okay.
And you can try it, but if it goes badly, don't be like, oh, wow, this, like, what happened? It's like, well, life happened. That's normally what happens. don't feel bad about it. Just, find some other people, or, basically just if it's not working, get out quick, because it's not worth fighting that fight in a student environment. Do you know what I mean? When no one's getting paid. I don't know whether that sounds cynical or not. I'm not sure.
That's all.
But it's true.
It's all good. I think there's I think there's multiple ways of doing that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's just being aware that can happen.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think that's it for today's stream. We are over time.
Stop talking.
And it's been awesome. I've actually a couple of times I wanted to stop drawing myself so I can just listen in and pay attention. So but I hope you guys can kind of see what everyone's been working on. Some really cool. It's a cool robot, dragon, castles, lots of cool stuff. So I guess that's mostly what the stream was about, just checking out, some cool art. So, thanks, guys. Thanks, Tim and Ned, for joining in. And,
no worries. That's good.
Yeah, and we'll see everyone in the next stream.
Sounds good.
Okay.
See you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.